She was about to give up waiting, until a little Modoc with a toy bow asked, "Will you marry my papa?" This is the story of how a broken promise led to an unexpected family, and how sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the deepest disappointments. Crater Lake Territory, Oregon, September 1878. The stagecoach wheels had long since disappeared into the dust clouds beyond the ridge, leaving Helena Flynn standing alone on what passed for a main street in Timber Ridge. The frontier town consisted of little more than a dozen weathered buildings, a trading post, a blacksmith shop, and the dubious promise of civilization that seemed to mock her with every gust of wind that rolled down from the Cascade Mountains. Lena clutched the crumpled letter in her gloved hand, the paper soft from countless readings during her 3-week journey from San Francisco. The elegant script had promised so much: a successful ranch owner named William Ashford, a grand house overlooking the valley, a wedding planned for her arrival, and most importantly, a new life far from the suffocating constraints of her late father's debts and her stepmother's cold indifference. "Are you sure this is where you meant to come, miss?" The stagecoach driver had asked her twice before departing, eyeing the rough settlement with obvious skepticism. Now standing in the ankle-deep dust with her 2 traveling trunks beside her, Lena was beginning to understand his concern. The trading post door creaked open, and a grizzled man in a leather apron emerged, wiping his hands on a dirty cloth. His weathered face carried the kind of skepticism that came from seeing too many dreams die in the harsh reality of frontier life. "You the bride?" he asked without preamble, his eyes taking in her carefully pressed traveling dress and impractical city boots. "I am Miss Helena Flynn, here to meet Mr. William Ashford," she replied, lifting her chin with more confidence than she felt. "I was told he would be expecting me. He has a ranch nearby, raises cattle and horses." The man's expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Ma'am, I've been running this post for 12 years, and I know every rancher, homesteader, and drifter within 50 miles of here." He paused, clearly reluctant to continue. "There ain't no William Ashford in these parts. Never has been." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. The letter fluttered from her suddenly nerveless fingers, caught by the wind and tumbling across the dusty street like a dying thing. "But he wrote to me for months. He described this place, the mountains, the lake. He knew about the trading routes and the seasonal changes." "Oh, the descriptions might be real enough," the man said, bending to retrieve the scattered pages. "Any drifter passing through could paint you a picture of the territory. But miss, I'm telling you true, there's no Ashford Ranch, no William Ashford, and no wedding waiting for you here." Lena sank onto one of her trunks, the reality crushing down upon her like an avalanche. She had sold everything: her father's pocket watch, her mother's jewelry, even the small house in San Francisco that was all she had left after the creditors finished with the estate. She had precisely $4.37 in her reticule, enough perhaps for a few nights' lodging, but nowhere near sufficient for passage back to California. The proprietor of the trading post, who introduced himself as Jim Patterson, studied her with careful attention. "Look, miss, we got a boarding house of sorts. Mrs. Kowalski rents rooms above the bakery. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and safe. Maybe you could stay a few days, figure out what you want to do next." The boarding house room was little more than a closet with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over the dusty street. Lena sat on the lumpy mattress and tried to make sense of her situation. She had been corresponding with William Ashford for 8 months, ever since answering his advertisement in the San Francisco Chronicle. His letters had been articulate, charming, full of details about his cattle ranch and his plans for expanding into horse breeding. Had it all been an elaborate fiction? The thought made her stomach churn. What kind of person would create such an elaborate deception? She had been honest about her circumstances, the daughter of a failed businessman, alone in the world, except for a stepmother who made no secret of her desire to see Lena married off and out of the house. That first night, she barely slept. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the frontier town settling into evening. Men's voices from the saloon, The distant howl of coyotes, the creak and groan of wooden buildings adjusting to the temperature drop. It was a harsh, lonely sound that seemed to echo the emptiness in her chest. The second day brought no relief. Lena ventured out to explore the town, hoping against hope that there had been some mistake, that William Ashford might appear with a reasonable explanation. Instead, she found curious stares and whispered conversations that died when she approached. By afternoon, it was clear that news of her situation had spread through the small community like wildfire. "Another one?" she heard Mrs. Kowalski mutter to the baker's wife. "Third girl this year to come out here chasing some phantom suitor. It's downright cruel, if you ask me." Lena spent the evening writing letters to her stepmother in San Francisco, to the few distant relatives she could remember, to anyone who might offer assistance or shelter. But even as she wrote, she knew the futility of it. She had burned her bridges thoroughly when she left California, convinced she was heading toward a new and better life. On the third day, she began to accept the harsh reality of her situation. She would need to find work, any work, to survive until she could figure out a way forward. Timber Ridge was not a place that offered many opportunities for a woman of gentle upbringing. But perhaps she could find employment as a seamstress or a teacher. It was on the fourth day that her luck seemed to take a turn for the worse. Mrs. Kowalski informed her that another boarder was arriving, a traveling preacher who had reserved the room for a week, and Lena would need to find alternative accommodations. "I'm sorry, dear, but business is business," the older woman said, though her expression suggested genuine regret. "Maybe you could ask around, see if anyone needs household help in exchange for room and board." Lena packed her belongings with mechanical precision, trying not to think about how rapidly her situation was deteriorating. 4 days in Timber Ridge had reduced her savings to less than $2, and now she faced the prospect of sleeping outdoors in a frontier town where the nights were growing increasingly cold. She was carrying her trunks down the narrow stairs when she heard voices from the street below. A man's voice, deep and patient, speaking in what sounded like a mixture of English and another language she didn't recognize. Through the window, she could see a tall figure in worn buckskin and a broad-brimmed hat, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. But it was the small figure beside him that caught her attention. A child, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with long, dark braids and clothes that seemed to blend frontier practicality with what Lena assumed were traditional Modoc elements. In the child's hands was a small bow, clearly a toy carved with intricate designs. The man, Marcus Greywolf, she learned later, was speaking quietly to his daughter in what sounded like patient instruction. Even from a distance, Lena could see the gentle way he corrected the child's grip on the toy bow, the pride in his expression when she managed to pull the string properly. There was something about the scene that stopped Lena in her tracks. Perhaps it was the obvious love between father and child, or the way they seemed completely comfortable in their own world despite the curious stares of other townspeople. Whatever it was, she found herself watching them with an intensity that surprised her. The child, Sage, she would soon learn, seemed to sense her observation. The little girl looked up toward the boarding house window and caught sight of Lena's face framed there. Instead of looking away, Sage raised her hand in a small, tentative wave. Lena found herself waving back, charmed, despite her desperate circumstances, by the child's friendly gesture. Sage said something to her father, pointing toward the window. Marcus Greywolf looked up, touching the brim of his hat in polite acknowledgement before guiding his daughter toward the trading post. That evening, as Lena sat in the boarding house parlor trying to decide what to do next, she overheard a conversation between Mrs. Kowalski and another woman about the man and child she had seen. "That's Marcus Greywolf," Mrs. Kowalski was saying. "Lives up in the hills with that little girl of his. His wife died 3 years back. Terrible tragedy. He brings the child to town once a month for supplies, but mostly they keep to themselves. Shame about the little one," the other woman replied. "Growing up without a mother, and him trying to raise her all alone. She's a sweet child, though. Always polite when they come to town. Lena found herself thinking about the father and daughter as she lay in bed that night. There had been something in the way they moved together, the obvious bond between them, that spoke of a deep love, despite whatever hardships they had faced. It made her own loneliness feel even more acute. The next morning brought another blow. Lena approached several businesses about possible employment, only to be turned away with varying degrees of politeness. The harsh reality was that Timber Ridge was a rough frontier town with little need for the skills of a gently raised young woman. She was sitting on a bench outside the trading post, trying to summon the courage to approach the proprietor about working in exchange for meals, when she noticed the commotion near the blacksmith shop. A crowd had gathered, and she could hear urgent voices calling for help. Through the press of bodies, she could see Marcus Grey Wolf kneeling beside his daughter, who lay unconscious on the ground. The child's face was pale, and there was a growing pool of blood beneath her head. "What happened?" Lena asked the woman beside her. "Little Sage was playing with that toy bow of hers, got excited, and ran backward right into the corner of the blacksmith's anvil," the woman replied. "Hit her head something fierce. Her daddy's beside himself." Without thinking, Lena pushed through the crowd. Her father had been a physician before his business ventures failed, and she had assisted him many times with patients. The sight of the injured child stirred something deep within her, a combination of professional knowledge and maternal instinct she hadn't known she possessed. "Let me through," she said firmly. "I have medical training." Marcus Grey Wolf looked up at her with eyes dark with fear and desperation. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of a life lived outdoors. But right now, all of that was overshadowed by his terror for his daughter. "Please," he said simply, and the single word carried such weight of hope and desperation that Lena's heart clenched. She knelt beside the child, her training taking over. The head wound looked worse than it probably was. Head injuries always bled profusely, but Sage's breathing was steady and her pulse strong. Lena pressed her handkerchief against the wound to stem the bleeding, then gently examined the child's pupils. "She has a concussion," she announced, "but I don't think it's severe. We need to get her somewhere quiet and watch her carefully for the next day or two." Marcus's relief was palpable. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to repay—" "Just get her somewhere safe," Lena interrupted. "That's payment enough." As the crowd dispersed and Marcus carried Sage toward a wagon, Lena found herself following. She told herself it was merely professional concern, but deep down she knew it was something more. There had been something in Marcus's eyes when he looked at his injured daughter, a love so fierce and protective that it had stirred something in her own heart. Jim Patterson approached her as she watched the wagon disappear into the hills. "That was a fine thing you did, miss," he said. "Not many folks would have stepped forward like that." Lena shrugged, suddenly embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Patterson said firmly. "You did what someone with a good heart would do. Marcus Grey Wolf is a good man, and that little girl is the light of his life. You may have saved her today." As Lena returned to the boarding house that evening, she found herself thinking not about her own desperate situation, but about the man and child who had disappeared into the hills. Something about their obvious love for each other, their quiet dignity in the face of tragedy and hardship, had touched her in a way she didn't fully understand. She was still thinking about them when sleep finally came. And in her dreams she saw a little girl with dark braids and a toy bow, asking questions that seemed to echo with possibilities she had never considered. The next morning would bring changes none of them could have anticipated, but that night Helena Flynn fell asleep, thinking not about the man who had abandoned her, but about the father and daughter who had touched her heart in ways that promises and pretty letters never could. 2 days had passed since the accident at the blacksmith shop, and Helena Flynn found herself thinking constantly about the injured child and her desperate father. She had taken a job scrubbing floors at the saloon for 50 cents a day and a place to sleep in the storage room. Hardly dignified work, but it kept her from the streets while she figured out her next move. The work was backbreaking. Her hands were raw from the lye soap, and the men who frequented the establishment treated her with a mixture of pity and inappropriate attention that made her skin crawl. She was dumping a bucket of dirty water behind the saloon when she heard the familiar clip-clop of horse hooves approaching down the main street. Through the gap between buildings, she caught sight of the same wagon that had carried the injured child away from town. But this time, instead of lying unconscious, little Sage sat upright beside her father, a white bandage visible around her head like a badge of survival. Lena's heart lifted with relief. The child was alive, alert, and apparently well enough to make the journey back to town. She watched as Marcus helped his daughter down from the wagon with careful protective movements, his hands never straying far from her small form. Even from a distance, she could see that Sage moved more slowly than before, but she was walking on her own and seemed to be talking animatedly to her father. "Miss Lena! Miss Lena!" The high, sweet voice carried across the dusty street like a bell. Sage had spotted her and was waving enthusiastically, apparently having remembered the woman who had helped her. The child started toward her with the determined gait of someone who had something important to say, Marcus following close behind with an expression that mixed amusement with parental caution. Lena dropped her bucket and hurried to meet them, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. As they drew closer, she could see that Sage's dark eyes were bright and alert, though there were still traces of bruising around the bandage. The little girl was wearing a different outfit today, a simple dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with small shells and colorful beadwork that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Papa said you saved my life," Sage announced without preamble, looking up at Lena with the kind of direct gaze that children use when they're trying to understand something important. "He said I might have died if you hadn't known what to do when I hit my head. I just helped," Lena said gently, kneeling to bring herself to the child's eye level. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? Any headaches or dizziness?" "A little," Sage admitted, touching the bandage gingerly. "But Papa makes me drink terrible-tasting tea that he says will help. It's made from willow bark and tastes like mud, but it does make the aching stop." Marcus stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Miss Flynn, I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. The doctor in Klamath Falls confirmed your diagnosis. Sage had a concussion, but it wasn't severe because you acted so quickly to stop the bleeding and keep her still." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks at his formal gratitude. "I'm just glad she's all right. You traveled all the way to Klamath Falls. That's a 3-day journey." "I had to be sure," Marcus said simply, and something in his tone made it clear that no distance would have been too far when it came to his daughter's well-being. "The doctor there has real medical training, not like the man who claims to be a physician here in town. He said you probably prevented serious complications." Sage tugged at her father's sleeve, then looked back at Lena with the kind of intense focus that children bring to matters of great importance. "Papa, can we ask her now?" "You promised we could ask her." Marcus looked suddenly uncomfortable, his weathered hands fidgeting with the brim of his hat. "Sage, maybe this isn't the right time. Miss Flynn looks busy." "Ask me what?" Lena inquired, curious about what could make this quiet, dignified man appear so ill at ease. Sage looked from her father to Lena and back again, clearly bursting with something she needed to say. "Papa needs help, and I think you're the one who should help him. Not with medicine, well, maybe with medicine too, but with other things." "Important things, Sage," Marcus warned gently. "We talked about this. You can't just—" "But Papa, you said yourself that she was kind and smart and pretty." Sage interrupted with the devastating honesty that only children possess. "And she doesn't have anywhere to go. And we have plenty of room in our cabin. Mrs. Patterson told Mrs. Kowalski that Miss Lena is sleeping in the saloon now because she doesn't have money for the boarding house." Lena felt her face burn with embarrassment at having her desperate circumstances discussed so openly. But before she could protest, Sage continued with gathering momentum. "And Papa, you get so lonely sometimes. I see you looking at Mama's picture and being sad. Maybe if Miss Lena came to live with us, you wouldn't be sad so much. And I could learn more about taking care of people when they get hurt like she took care of me." "Sage, that's enough," Marcus said firmly, though his tone remained gentle. "You can't just invite someone to come live with us because you think it would be convenient." But Sage was not to be deterred. She walked directly to Lena and looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for her small face. "Miss Lena, would you like to come see our cabin? It's really pretty, and we have a garden where Papa grows vegetables and healing plants. And I have lots of books that belong to Mama, and Papa could teach you about the mountains and the animals." Lena found herself at a loss for words. The child's invitation was so genuine, so completely without guile or calculation, that it took her breath away. She looked at Marcus, who was studying his boots as if they held the secrets of the universe. "Your daughter is very kind," Lena said carefully. "But I couldn't impose." "It wouldn't be imposing," Sage said quickly. "We have room, and Papa is a really good cook, and our cabin is much nicer than that smelly old saloon. Plus, winter is coming and Papa says it gets really cold here. You'll need a warm place to stay." Marcus finally looked up, and Lena saw something in his dark eyes that made her breath catch, a mixture of hope and vulnerability that he was trying hard to conceal. "What Sage is trying to say, though not very diplomatically, is that we would be honored to have you as our guest, at least until you can make other arrangements." "But I don't want her to make other arrangements," Sage said with the stubborn determination that seemed to be a family trait. "I want her to stay forever. I want her to be my new mama." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus's face went pale, and for a moment nobody seemed to know what to say. Lena felt her heart do something strange and complicated in her chest, a combination of longing and terror that left her feeling dizzy. "Sage," Marcus said quietly, "that's not how these things work. You can't just decide that someone is going to be your mother. Miss Flynn has her own life, her own plans." "What plans?" Sage asked with devastating logic. "Mrs. Patterson says she came here to marry someone who doesn't even exist. And now she's working at the saloon and sleeping on the floor because she doesn't have anywhere else to go. That doesn't sound like very good plans to me." Lena winced at the child's blunt assessment of her situation, but she had to admit there was a certain accuracy to it. "Sage, sweetheart, it's not that simple. Your father and I barely know each other, so get to know each other," Sage said, as if the solution were obvious. "That's what people do, isn't it? They spend time together and talk and find out if they like each other. And if you do like each other, then maybe you could get married and I could have a mama again." Marcus looked mortified. "Sage, you cannot ask someone to marry your father 5 minutes after meeting them properly. That's not how civilized people behave." But Sage was undaunted. She reached out and took Lena's hand, with the complete trust that children show when they've decided someone is safe. "Miss Lena, do you know how to make biscuits?" "Papa tries, but they always come out hard as rocks." "And do you know any songs?" "Mama used to sing to me at bedtime, but Papa doesn't know the same songs." Lena found herself charmed, despite the awkwardness of the situation. "I know a few songs," she admitted. "And I can make biscuits, though I can't promise they'll be any better than your father's. They couldn't possibly be worse," Sage said, with such conviction that both adults had to smile. "So will you come, just to visit? Papa could show you his workshop where he makes furniture and fixes things. And I could show you my special place by the creek where I practice with my bow." Lena looked at Marcus, who was watching his daughter with an expression of fond exasperation, mixed with something that might have been hope. "Mr. Grey Wolf, I don't want to impose on your hospitality, especially when your daughter has been injured." "You wouldn't be imposing," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. "Sage is right about several things, though I wish she hadn't expressed them quite so bluntly. You did save my daughter's life, and I owe you a debt I can never repay." If offering you a safe place to stay until you can get back on your feet helps settle that debt even slightly, it would be my honor." "And," Sage added helpfully, "Papa really is lonely. Sometimes I hear him talking to Mama's picture late at night when he thinks I'm asleep. He tells her about me and asks her what he should do about things. I think he'd like to have someone real to talk to instead of just a picture." "Sage," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of warning, but she continued undaunted. "And Miss Lena, you look lonely too. I can tell because you have the same look in your eyes that Papa gets sometimes, like you're missing something important but you don't know how to find it again." The observation was so astute and so gently delivered that Lena felt tears prick her eyes. How had this child, barely 7 years old, managed to see straight through to the heart of her pain? "You're very observant," she said softly. "Mama always said I see things that other people miss," Sage replied matter-of-factly. "She said it was a gift, but sometimes it makes people uncomfortable when you notice too much about them." Marcus reached out and touched his daughter's shoulder gently. "Your mother was right about your gift," he said, "but she also taught you about being respectful of other people's feelings. Miss Flynn needs time to think about your invitation." "Actually," Lena heard herself saying, "I don't think I need very much time at all." Both Marcus and Sage looked at her with surprised attention. "The truth is," Lena continued, feeling as if she were jumping off a cliff into unknown waters, "I don't have very many options right now, and what options I do have aren't particularly appealing. Working at the saloon is," she paused, searching for diplomatic words, "not sustainable. And I have to admit, I'm curious about your cabin and your way of life. It sounds peaceful." Sage's face lit up like sunrise. "Does that mean you'll come?" "Really and truly, it means I'll come for a visit," Lena said carefully, "to see how we all get along together. But Sage, I want you to understand that visiting doesn't automatically mean staying forever. And it certainly doesn't mean marrying your father. Those are very big decisions that take time and careful thought, but you'll consider it." Sage pressed with the persistence of a lawyer. "You'll think about staying and maybe being my mama someday." Lena looked at Marcus, who was watching this exchange with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "I can't promise more than that." Sage let out a whoop of joy that made several passers-by turn and stare. "Papa, did you hear? She said she'll consider it." That means maybe," Marcus agreed, but his eyes were on Lena's face. "When would you like to come? I could bring the wagon back tomorrow if that would suit you." "Tomorrow would be fine," Lena replied, wondering what she had just committed herself to. "I'll need to settle things with Mr. Peterson at the saloon and gather my belongings. Can I help you pack?" Sage asked eagerly. "I'm very good at folding things neatly. Mama taught me before she got sick. That's very kind of you, but I don't have very much to pack," Lena admitted. "Just 2 trunks with clothes and a few personal items." 2 trunks. Sage exclaimed as if this were a treasure trove beyond imagining. "Papa, did you hear? She has 2 whole trunks. That means she must have pretty dresses and maybe books and interesting things from the city." Marcus smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Yes, I heard. And I'm sure Miss Flynn will show you some of her things once she's settled in." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Marcus needed to complete his business at the trading post, purchasing supplies that would last them through the approaching winter. Sage insisted on staying with Lena while her father conducted his errands, chattering constantly about the cabin, their daily routines, and her hopes for what their guest might teach her. "Do you know how to read?" Sage asked as they sat on a bench outside the general store. "Yes, I do. Do you?" "Oh yes, Mama taught me before she died, and Papa has been helping me with the harder words. But I want to learn to read the books that belong to Mama. They're too difficult for me now, but Papa says someday I'll be able to understand them. They're about medicine and healing and taking care of people when they're sick." Lena felt a flutter of interest. "Your mother was a healer, the best in 3 counties, Sage said with obvious pride. People came from far away when they heard about Mama's skill with herbs and birthing babies and setting broken bones. She learned from her grandmother, who learned from her grandmother before that. It's supposed to be passed down through the women in the family. And you want to learn more than anything, Sage said with the kind of fierce determination that reminded Lena of her father's expression when he spoke of protecting his daughter. But Papa doesn't know all the things Mama knew. He knows some of it, but not everything. He says he wishes there was someone who could teach me properly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The implications of this conversation were not lost on Lena. Was this why Sage had been so insistent about inviting her to stay? Had the child somehow sensed that Lena's medical training, limited though it was, might fill a gap in her education? "Sage," she said carefully, "you know that I'm not a real doctor, don't you? I only know basic things that my father taught me." "But you knew what to do when I got hurt," Sage pointed out. "You knew about my pupils, and about keeping me still and stopping the bleeding. Papa said those were exactly the right things to do. And you must know other things too, things that Papa doesn't know." Before Lena could respond, Marcus returned from his errands, his arms loaded with packages, and his expression slightly harried. "I think that's everything we'll need for the next month," he said. "Sage, did you talk Miss Flynn's ear off while I was gone?" "We were having very important conversations about medicine and learning," Sage replied with dignity. "Miss Lena knows lots of things that could help me become a healer like Mama was." Marcus's expression grew thoughtful as he looked at Lena. "Is that true? You have medical training beyond what you demonstrated the other day?" "Some," Lena admitted. "My father was a physician before he went into business. I used to assist him with patients when I was younger. I know basic anatomy, how to treat common injuries and illnesses, some surgical techniques. Nothing fancy, but more than most people learn." "That's wonderful," Sage exclaimed. "Papa, do you see? It's like Mama sent her to us. First she saves my life, and now she can teach me the things I need to know to help other people." Marcus looked uncomfortable with his daughter's interpretation of events. "Sage, we can't assume that Miss Flynn came here just to help us. She has her own reasons for being in Timber Ridge and her own goals." "Actually," Lena said slowly, "I'm not sure I do anymore. I came here with very specific plans that turned out to be based on lies and deception. Maybe it's time I considered the possibility that I ended up here for reasons I hadn't anticipated." The ride to the Grey Wolf cabin took them through some of the most beautiful country Lena had ever seen. They followed a winding trail that led up into the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, past groves of towering pines and aspen trees that were just beginning to turn gold with the approaching autumn. A creek ran alongside the trail for much of the way, its clear water bubbling over smooth stones and creating a constant, soothing soundtrack to their journey. Sage kept up a running commentary about everything they passed, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about adventures she'd had in various locations. "That's where I saw the bear cubs playing last spring," she said, pointing to a small meadow. "And over there is where Papa taught me to identify edible plants. And that big boulder is where Mama used to sit when she was thinking about difficult problems." As they climbed higher into the mountains, Lena began to understand why Marcus and Sage had chosen to live away from town. The air was cleaner here, scented with pine and wildflowers, and the silence was broken only by natural sounds: bird calls, the rustle of wind through leaves, the distant splash of water over rocks. It was peaceful in a way that made the harsh noise and constant tension of Timber Ridge seem like something from another world. "There it is," Sage announced as they crested a small hill. "That's our home." Lena caught her breath at the sight before them. The cabin sat in a natural clearing surrounded by tall trees, its log walls weathered to a warm golden brown that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a vegetable garden stretched along one side of the house. A workshop with an attached lean-to stood nearby, and beyond that she could see a small barn and a corral where several horses grazed peacefully. "It's beautiful," she said softly, meaning every word. "Papa built most of it himself," Sage said proudly. "The main cabin was here when Mama and Papa first came, but he added the extra room and the workshop and fixed everything up nice. Mama planted the garden and picked out where to put the flowers." As they approached the cabin, Lena could see the care and craftsmanship that had gone into every detail. The logs were perfectly fitted, the roof was tight and well-maintained, and everything from the front steps to the window boxes showed evidence of someone who took pride in creating a real home rather than just a place to shelter. "Welcome to our mountain," Marcus said as he helped her down from the wagon. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." "I think I will be," Lena replied, looking around at the peaceful setting and feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen for the first time since she'd arrived in Oregon. "I think I will be." The interior of the Grey Wolf cabin was nothing like what Helena had expected from a frontier home. Instead of the rough, utilitarian space she had imagined, she found herself in a warm, welcoming environment that spoke of careful attention to both comfort and beauty. The main room featured hand-hewn furniture that showed Marcus's skill as a craftsman. With smooth surfaces and joints so perfect, they seemed to flow naturally from the wood itself. Colorful woven rugs covered the plank floors, and shelves lined one wall, filled with an impressive collection of books that ranged from practical manuals to works of literature. "Mama collected books," Sage explained, noticing Lena's surprise at the extensive library. "She said that living in the wilderness was no excuse for letting your mind go wild too. She taught school before she married Papa, and she always said that learning was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you." The cabin consisted of 3 rooms, the main living area with its stone fireplace and dining table, a smaller room that had obviously been shared by Marcus and his late wife, and a tiny chamber that served as Sage's bedroom. Every surface showed evidence of a woman's touch, from the carefully mended curtains to the dried herbs hanging in neat bundles from the rafters. It was clear that Marcus had maintained everything exactly as his wife had left it, creating a shrine to their shared life that was both touching and slightly melancholy. "You can have Mama's sewing room," Sage announced, leading Lena to a corner of the main room where a small alcove had been fitted with shelves, a comfortable chair, and a narrow bed that was currently covered with quilting materials. Papa made it for her so she could work on her projects near the fire during winter. But he moved all her things to the bedroom after she died, so it's empty now. Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying Lena's trunks, his expression carefully neutral. "I hope you don't mind the arrangement. It's not very private, but it's warm and comfortable. If you'd prefer, I could move into the workshop and you could have my room." "This is perfect," Lena said quickly, touched by his consideration, but unwilling to displace him further. "I'm grateful for any shelter that doesn't involve sleeping on a saloon floor." Over the next few days, Lena found herself settling into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. She rose early to help prepare breakfast, discovered that Marcus was actually an excellent cook, despite his daughter's complaints about his biscuits, and spent her mornings exploring the property while Sage recovered from her head injury. The afternoon hours were devoted to what became informal lessons, with Lena sharing her medical knowledge, while Sage taught her about the local plants and their traditional uses. "Mama always said that the best healers know both ways," Sage explained as they walked through Marcus's carefully tended herb garden. "The old ways that her grandmother's people used, and the new ways that white doctors learn from books. She said you had to understand both to really help people." Lena was fascinated by the sophistication of traditional Modoc medicine. Sage, despite her young age, could identify dozens of plants and explain their medicinal properties with an accuracy that impressed even someone with formal training. She knew which bark to harvest for fever, which roots could ease digestive problems, and which leaves made the best poultices for wounds. More importantly, she understood the delicate balance of dosages and the importance of timing in the gathering and preparation of remedies. "Your mother taught you well," Lena said as Sage demonstrated the proper way to dry chamomile flowers. "This knowledge is incredibly valuable. You're carrying on traditions that go back generations, but I need to know the other things too," Sage said, with the focused intensity she brought to subjects that mattered to her. "The things about anatomy and surgery that white doctors learn. Mama always said that the best way to honor the old knowledge was to add new knowledge to it, not replace it." These conversations inevitably drew Marcus into their circle. Despite his initial hesitation about having a stranger in their home, he began joining their afternoon sessions, contributing his own knowledge of wilderness survival and practical problem-solving. Lena discovered that he was far more educated than she had initially assumed, with a deep understanding of both scientific principles and traditional wisdom that came from living close to the land. "My wife was not the only one who valued learning," he explained when Lena commented on his extensive knowledge of botany. "I spent 2 years at the Indian Industrial School in Carlisle before I decided that their version of civilization was not for me. But I kept the useful parts of what they taught me and combined them with what my grandmother knew about living in harmony with the natural world." It was during one of these afternoon conversations that Lena first glimpsed the depth of loss that Marcus carried. They had been discussing the treatment of pneumonia when he suddenly went quiet, staring off toward the mountains with an expression of profound sadness. "Mama died of pneumonia," Sage said softly, apparently reading her father's thoughts. Even though she was the best healer for miles around, she couldn't save herself. The fever came on too fast, and by the time Papa realized how sick she was, it was too late for any medicine to help. Marcus cleared his throat roughly. "Sarah was treating a family down in the valley. Whole household came down sick at once, and she stayed with them for a week to nurse them through the worst of it. She was exhausted when she came home, and her resistance was low. The disease took hold faster than we could fight it. Papa blames himself," Sage added, with the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing painful truths adults try to hide. "He thinks if he had made her come home sooner, or if he had recognized the signs earlier, he might have been able to save her. But I don't think that's true. I think Mama knew she was taking a risk, and she decided that helping those people was worth it." The conversation revealed layers of complexity in Marcus's character that Lena was only beginning to understand. He was a man caught between two worlds, educated in white institutions, but committed to preserving traditional ways of life. Respected in the broader community, but always conscious of the prejudice that simmered beneath the surface of frontier society. His marriage to a white woman had complicated things further, creating a family that belonged fully to neither world, while drawing strength from both traditions. These insights came gradually, revealed through small moments and casual observations, rather than formal conversations. Lena noticed the way Marcus switched effortlessly between languages when speaking with his daughter, how he incorporated both Christian prayers and traditional ceremonies into their daily routines, and how he had chosen to raise Sage with knowledge of both her white and Modoc heritage, rather than favoring one over the other. The evenings were perhaps the most challenging part of their new routine. After Sage was tucked into bed, Marcus and Lena found themselves alone together in the main room, acutely aware of each other's presence in ways that daylight activities made easier to ignore. They tried to maintain comfortable distance, Marcus working on furniture repairs, while Lena mended clothes or read. But the domestic intimacy of the situation created an undercurrent of tension that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "You don't have to stay in the main room on my account," Marcus said one evening, after a particularly long stretch of awkward silence. "I know this arrangement is not ideal for a woman accustomed to privacy." "I'm not accustomed to much privacy," Lena replied, looking up from the book she had been pretending to read. I shared a house with my stepmother and her 2 daughters for 3 years after my father died. This is actually more peaceful than what I'm used to. It was the first time she had volunteered personal information about her past, and Marcus seemed to recognize the significance of the gesture. Your father died recently, 4 years ago. He was a physician, as I mentioned, but he made some unfortunate investments that cost him his practice and most of our property. The stress of the financial problems affected his health, and he died of a heart condition when I was 21. My stepmother inherited what little was left, and she made it clear that supporting a stepdaughter indefinitely was not part of her plans. Hence the correspondence with William Ashford, Marcus said with understanding. Hence the correspondence with a fictional man who promised me a life that never existed, Lena confirmed with a bitter laugh. I was so desperate to escape my situation that I convinced myself his letters were genuine, even when part of me suspected they were too good to be true. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the piece of wood he had been smoothing. Sometimes the heart believes what it needs to believe in order to keep going, he said finally. That's not weakness, that's survival. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure, but before she could respond, Sage's voice called from her bedroom. Papa, I can't sleep. My head hurts again. The moment of connection was broken as Marcus immediately went to tend to his daughter, but something had shifted between them. Over the following days, their conversations became easier and more natural, moving from polite exchanges to genuine discussions about everything from literature to philosophy to their hopes for Sage's future. It was during the 2nd week of her stay that Lena had her first real test as a member of the household. Marcus had gone down to the valley to deliver a piece of furniture to a customer, leaving Sage in Lena's care with strict instructions about the child's recovery routine. The day started normally, with Sage showing steady improvement and no signs of complications from her head injury. But by mid-afternoon, everything changed. Sage complained of feeling dizzy and nauseous, symptoms that could indicate a serious problem with her healing brain. When she began vomiting and seemed confused about where she was, Lena knew they faced a medical emergency that required immediate attention. "Sage, sweetheart, I need you to look at me," Lena said, keeping her voice calm despite her growing concern. "Can you tell me what day it is?" "I don't know," Sage whispered, her eyes unfocused and her skin pale. "Everything feels fuzzy, and the room keeps spinning." Lena's medical training kicked in as she carefully examined the child for signs of increased intracranial pressure or other complications from the original injury. Sage's pupils were equal but sluggish, her pulse was rapid but steady, and she seemed to drift in and out of alertness in a way that suggested her brain was struggling to function normally. The nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away in Klamath Falls, and Marcus wouldn't return until evening. Lena found herself completely responsible for the well-being of a child whose father had already lost one person he loved to illness. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, but her training and instincts took over. She moved Sage to the main room where she could monitor her more closely, elevated the child's head to reduce pressure, and began administering small sips of willow bark tea to combat both the pain and inflammation that might be affecting her brain. Every few minutes she checked Sage's responses, looking for any sign that her condition was worsening. "Miss Lena," Sage mumbled at one point, "am I going to die like Mama did?" "No," Lena said firmly, taking the child's small hand in hers. "You're not going to die. You're going to get better, and your father is going to come home, and we're going to figure out exactly what's causing these symptoms. But I need you to stay awake and talk to me, all right? Can you do that?" For the next several hours, Lena maintained a careful vigil, monitoring Sage's condition and adjusting her treatment as needed. She used cool compresses to reduce fever, administered measured doses of herbal remedies, and most importantly, kept the child conscious and responsive through constant gentle conversation. As the sun began to set, Sage's condition finally began to stabilize, Her nausea subsided, her confusion cleared, and she was able to answer simple questions accurately. By the time Marcus returned, dusty and tired from his journey, his daughter was sleeping peacefully, with normal color in her cheeks and steady breathing. "What happened?" Marcus demanded as soon as he saw Lena's exhausted face and the medicinal supplies scattered around Sage's makeshift sickbed. Lena explained the day's events, describing Sage's symptoms and the treatment she had provided. As she spoke, she watched Marcus's expression cycle through fear, gratitude, and something deeper that she couldn't quite identify. "You probably saved her life," he said quietly when she finished her account. "Again, those symptoms you described, confusion, vomiting, altered consciousness, those are signs of serious complications from head trauma. If you hadn't known what to do, but I did know," Lena interrupted, suddenly understanding something important about herself. "I knew exactly what to do and I wasn't afraid. For the first time since my father died, I felt like I was using my skills for something that really mattered." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Sarah used to say that healing was not just about knowledge, it was about having the courage to act when action was needed, even when you weren't completely certain of the outcome." "Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Lena said softly. "She was, but she's gone, and Sage needs someone who can provide the kind of care you gave her today. Not just medical care, but the kind of watchful, intuitive attention that comes from genuine caring." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. But something fundamental had shifted in their relationship, moving them from the cautious courtesy of strangers to the deeper trust that comes from sharing responsibility for something precious. Later that evening, as Sage slept safely in her own bed and the cabin settled into peaceful quiet, Marcus and Lena found themselves sitting by the fire in comfortable silence. The day's crisis had stripped away some of the careful distance they had been maintaining, leaving them both emotionally raw and oddly vulnerable. "I keep thinking about what Sage asked me the day we met," Lena said suddenly, "about marrying her father. At the time, it seemed like the innocent fantasy of a child who wanted a mother. But now, Marcus prompted when she trailed off. "Now I'm beginning to wonder if she saw something that we adults were too cautious or too damaged to see for ourselves," Lena finished. "The possibility that sometimes the most unlikely circumstances can lead to the most necessary outcomes." Marcus stared into the fire for a long time before responding. "Sarah used to say that the mountain brought people together who needed each other, even when they didn't realize it themselves. She said the land had its own wisdom about these things. Do you believe that?" Lena asked. "I'm beginning to," Marcus replied, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "I'm beginning to think that maybe my daughter's instincts are better than my adult caution when it comes to matters of the heart." Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like whispered conversations, and somewhere in the distance an owl called to its mate. Inside the warm cabin, two people sat in contemplative silence, each beginning to understand that the careful walls they had built around their hearts might not be strong enough to withstand the quiet persistence of unexpected love. The next morning brought a new energy to their household, as if the previous day's crisis had cleared the air and allowed them all to breathe more freely. Sage woke feeling completely recovered, chattering excitedly about the adventure she had survived and the skills she had observed in her temporary caregiver. But there was also a new maturity in the way she looked at both adults, as if she understood that something important had been decided during the night. "Papa?" she said as they gathered around the breakfast table. "I think Miss Lena has proven that she belongs here, don't you? I mean, she saved my life twice now, and she knows how to take care of people. And she makes much better biscuits than you do." Marcus and Lena exchanged a look that held layers of meaning neither was quite ready to discuss openly. But for the first time since her arrival, Lena allowed herself to consider the possibility that perhaps she had indeed found what she had been searching for, even though it looked nothing like what she had expected to find. 3 weeks had passed since Helena Flynn arrived at the Grey Wolf cabin, and what had begun as a temporary arrangement was slowly transforming into something that felt remarkably like home. The autumn air had grown crisp, painting the surrounding mountains in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and the first light snowfall had dusted the higher peaks with pristine white. Inside the warm cabin, a comfortable rhythm had developed between the 3 inhabitants, each finding their place in a delicate dance of domestic harmony that none of them dared to examine too closely. Lena had discovered talents she never knew she possessed, from preserving vegetables for the winter months to helping Marcus with his woodworking projects. Her hands, once soft from city living, had grown strong and capable from mountain life. She could split kindling, tend a fire, and cook meals that actually tasted better than anything she had managed in her previous life. More importantly, she was learning to read the subtle signs of weather and season that determined daily life in the wilderness. Sage had recovered completely from her head injury and was thriving under the dual tutelage of her father and their guest. The child's quick mind absorbed everything from advanced reading lessons to complex botanical knowledge, and her natural gift for healing was developing under careful guidance. She had also appointed herself as the unofficial matchmaker of the household, making observations and suggestions that left both adults blushing and scrambling for diplomatic responses. "Miss Lena," Sage announced one morning as they prepared breakfast together, "I think you should know that Papa talks about you in his sleep sometimes. Last night he said your name 3 times, and he was smiling when he said it." "Sage," Marcus warned from across the room, where he was banking the fire. "People's sleeping habits are private matters. But it's good that he dreams about nice things," Sage continued, with the relentless logic of childhood. "He used to have bad dreams about Mama being sick, and sometimes he would wake up crying. Now he sleeps peaceful and quiet, and I think that's because you make him happy during the day." These innocent observations were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, particularly because Lena was beginning to suspect that her own feelings were developing in directions she had never anticipated. Marcus Grey Wolf was unlike any man she had ever known. Gentle but strong, thoughtful but decisive, carrying his grief with dignity while remaining open to new possibilities. Their conversations had grown deeper and more personal with each passing day, revealing layers of compatibility that went far beyond mere convenience. It was during the 4th week of her stay that everything changed. Lena was in the garden harvesting the last of the root vegetables before the hard frost arrived, when she heard horses approaching at speed. The sound was different from Marcus's usual calm pace, urgent, almost frantic, with multiple riders creating a thunderous drumbeat against the earth. She straightened from her work to see a group of 6 men on horseback cresting the hill that led to their peaceful valley. Even from a distance, she could tell that something was wrong. The riders moved with the aggressive purpose of a hunting party, and there was something in their formation that spoke of trouble rather than friendly visitation. Marcus emerged from his workshop at the sound, wiping his hands on a leather apron and shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. Lena saw his posture change as he recognized the approaching group, his shoulders tensing and his hands slowly clenching into fists. Whatever this visit represented, it was not welcome. "Sage," he called sharply, "come inside the cabin now." The child appeared from around the corner of the house, where she had been playing with a family of kittens that had taken up residence under the porch. "But Papa, I want to see the visitors inside." "Now," Marcus repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Sage recognized that voice and immediately obeyed, though not without casting curious glances over her shoulder at the approaching riders. Lena moved closer to the cabin, her instincts telling her that whatever was about to happen, she needed to be prepared for trouble. The lead rider was a large man with a red face and aggressive bearing, flanked by 5 others who looked like the kind of men who settled disputes with fists rather than words. She recognized the type from her time in Timber Ridge, hard-working but narrow-minded, quick to anger and slow to reason. "Grey Wolf," the lead rider shouted as the group came to a halt in front of the cabin. "We need to talk." Marcus stepped forward, his movement calm but his eyes watchful.
"Fletcher."
"What brings you and your friends to my land?" Tom Fletcher dismounted heavily, his boots hitting the ground with unnecessary force. He was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with the kind of swagger that came from being used to intimidating people smaller than himself. His companions remained mounted, forming a semicircle that effectively blocked the main path away from the cabin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "You know damn well what brings us here," Fletcher snarled. "My cattle have been getting sick, and word is that you've been doctoring them with your Indian medicines. 3 of my best breeding cows are dead, and I want compensation." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but Lena could see the tension in his jaw. "I haven't treated any of your cattle, Fletcher. I wouldn't presume to work on another man's livestock without permission." "Don't lie to me," Fletcher snapped. "My foreman saw tracks leading from your place to my south pasture, and everyone knows you practice that savage medicine you learned from your people. Probably poisoned my animals on purpose." Lena felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She recognized the ugly tone in Fletcher's voice, the way his companions were nodding in agreement, despite having no evidence beyond their leader's accusations. This was the kind of situation that could turn violent very quickly, particularly when racial prejudice was involved. "Your cattle are sick because you graze them too heavily in areas with poor drainage," Marcus said calmly. "The forage in those low areas picks up parasites from standing water, and your animals are too crowded to avoid contaminated feed. It's a problem that could be solved with better pasture management." "Are you calling me a poor rancher?" Fletcher demanded, his face growing redder. "I've been raising cattle in this valley since before you showed up with your half-breed daughter and your white wife." "Leave my family out of this," Marcus warned, and for the first time, there was steel in his voice. "Family?" Fletcher laughed harshly. "What family? Your woman died 3 years ago, and now I hear you've taken up with some city girl who showed up claiming to be a mail-order bride. What kind of man collects strays like that?" Lena stepped forward before Marcus could respond, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm standing right here, Mr. Fletcher. If you have something to say about me, you can say it to my face." Fletcher looked her up and down with obvious contempt. "So you're the one. Heard you came out here chasing some man who didn't exist, and now you're shacked up with Grey Wolf. Makes sense. Birds of a feather and all that." "That's enough," Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried a warning that made several of the mounted men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. "No, it's not enough," Fletcher shot back. "I'm tired of you people thinking you can do whatever you want without consequences. First you poisoned my cattle, and now you're harboring some woman of questionable character. This valley doesn't need your kind of influence." One of the other riders, a younger man with nervous eyes, leaned forward in his saddle. "Tom, maybe we should just get the sheriff involved instead of—" "The sheriff's 3 days away," Fletcher interrupted. "And by the time he gets here, the evidence will be gone. No, we're going to settle this right now, man to man." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Lena, his body language making it clear that he considered Fletcher's presence a direct threat. "You're on my property making false accusations and insulting my guest. I suggest you leave now before this situation gets out of hand." "Your guest?" Fletcher sneered. "Is that what you're calling her? Everyone in town knows what she really is, a woman with no morals and nowhere else to go. Perfect match for someone like you." The insult hung in the air like a match dropped near gunpowder. Lena felt Marcus tense beside her, and she could practically feel the violence building in the confrontation. These men had come looking for trouble, and they seemed determined to find it regardless of facts or reason. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, stepping beside Marcus, despite his protective stance. "Whatever problems you're having with your cattle have nothing to do with Mr. Grey Wolf or his family. Perhaps if you consulted with a veterinarian instead of looking for someone to blame. Don't lecture me, woman, Fletcher snapped. You're nothing but a piece of baggage that got dropped off in the wrong place. At least until Grey Wolf picked you up and brought you here to play house. That was apparently the final straw for Marcus. Lena saw the change come over him like a storm cloud moving across the sun, transforming his careful calm into something far more dangerous. You have exactly 1 minute to get off my land, he said, his voice low and deadly serious. Fletcher apparently recognized the threat because his hand moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip. Are you threatening me, Grey Wolf? That wouldn't be wise, considering you're outnumbered. Papa, Sage's voice came from the cabin doorway, small and frightened. The child had apparently been listening to the confrontation, and the fear in her tone made both men freeze. Fletcher's gaze shifted to Sage, and his expression grew even uglier. And there's the half-breed brat. Probably going to grow up just as troublesome as her father, assuming she survives the kind of life you're giving her. The threat to his daughter shattered Marcus's restraint completely. Lena saw him start forward, his fists clenched and his face transformed by protective rage. Fletcher's hand was already moving toward his weapon when she made a desperate decision. "Stop!" she shouted, stepping directly between the two men. "Mr. Fletcher, if you're looking for someone to blame for your problems, then blame me. I'm the one who's been gathering medicinal plants from the areas near your pasture. Maybe I disturbed something that affected your cattle. It was a complete fabrication, but it had the desired effect of redirecting Fletcher's attention away from Marcus and Sage." The big man looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to take responsibility for anything. "You admit it," he said suspiciously. "I admit that I've been learning about local plants and their uses," Lena replied, choosing her words carefully. "It's possible that my activities disturbed natural patterns in ways that affected the local wildlife. If so, I'm willing to discuss compensation for your losses." Marcus looked at her with alarm, clearly understanding that she was sacrificing herself to defuse the situation. "Lena, don't—" "It's all right," she said softly, not taking her eyes off Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, what exactly are you proposing?" Fletcher studied her for a long moment, apparently trying to decide whether her offer was genuine or some kind of trick. His companions shifted restlessly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation had taken. "I want $500 for my dead cattle," Fletcher said finally, "and I want you gone from this valley within a week. Both of you. This area doesn't need the kind of trouble you bring." The demand was outrageous. $500 was more money than most families saw in 2 years, and the threat of exile was clearly motivated by prejudice rather than legitimate grievance. But before Marcus could voice his objections, Lena surprised everyone by nodding calmly. "I accept your terms," she said clearly. "I'll arrange for the payment and make plans to leave the area within the week." "Lena, no," Marcus said urgently. "You don't have to do this. These accusations are groundless and you know it." But Fletcher was already looking satisfied with the outcome. "You heard her, Grey Wolf. The woman admits responsibility and accepts the consequences. I expect to see you both gone within 7 days, or there'll be worse trouble than dead cattle." The group of riders departed as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the lingering threat of violence barely avoided. Marcus stood in the yard staring after them, his fists still clenched and his breathing unsteady with suppressed rage. "Why did you do that?" he demanded, turning to face Lena with eyes that blazed with frustration and something that might have been fear. "Those accusations were lies and you know it. There was no reason for you to accept blame for something you didn't do." Lena sank onto the porch steps, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation and its implications. "Because they weren't really interested in the truth about your cattle," she said quietly. "They came here looking for an excuse to drive you away, and if I hadn't given them a scapegoat, they would have found another reason to cause trouble. So you sacrificed yourself to protect us." Marcus sat beside her, his voice heavy with guilt and gratitude. "Lena, I can't let you do that. This is my fight, my responsibility." "No," she said firmly. "This is about all of us now. Sage is as much my concern as yours, and I won't let her be hurt because small-minded people can't accept that different doesn't mean dangerous." From the doorway came the sound of quiet sobbing. Sage stood there with tears streaming down her face, having heard enough of the conversation to understand the implications. "You're going to leave us?" she whispered. "Just when we were becoming a real family?" The anguish in the child's voice broke Lena's heart, but she forced herself to remain strong. "Sweetheart, sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to keep the people they love safe." "But I don't want you to go," Sage cried, running to throw her arms around Lena's waist. "You can't leave us. You're supposed to be my new mama. You promised you would consider it." Marcus gathered both of them into his arms, his embrace fierce and protective. For a moment, they sat together in the growing dusk, a family united by love, but threatened by circumstances beyond their control. "There has to be another way," Marcus said finally. "I won't let Fletcher and his kind destroy what we've built here." But even as he spoke, they all knew the reality of their situation. $500 was an impossible sum, and Fletcher's threat of escalating violence was not idle. The mountain that had seemed like a refuge was now beginning to feel like a trap, and the future that had seemed so promising just hours earlier now appeared to be slipping away like sand through their fingers. That night, as Sage finally cried herself to sleep and the cabin settled into uneasy quiet, Marcus and Lena sat by the fire trying to find solutions to an impossible problem. The warmth and peace of their home felt fragile now, shadowed by the knowledge that forces beyond their control were working to tear apart everything they had built together. "I have some money," Lena said suddenly. "Not $500, but enough to make a start somewhere else. We could leave together, find a place where people don't know our history, and live as fugitives." Marcus shook his head. "Lena, you don't understand what you'd be giving up. A woman of your education and background could make a good life anywhere. You don't need to tie yourself to a half-breed widower and his daughter just because of misplaced loyalty. Is that what you think this is?" Lena demanded, turning to face him fully. "Misplaced loyalty? Marcus, I love that little girl as if she were my own daughter. And She stopped, the words she wanted to say hanging unspoken between them. "And you what?" he asked softly. Lena took a deep breath, knowing that everything was about to change regardless of what she said next. "And I love you," she said simply. "Not because I'm grateful for shelter or because I have nowhere else to go, but because somewhere in the past month I stopped being your guest and started being part of this family. The thought of losing that, of losing all of you, is more frightening than anything Fletcher could threaten." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper. "Sarah used to say that love finds a way to survive even the worst circumstances," he said finally. "But I never believed her until now, so what do we do?" Lena asked. "We fight," Marcus said quietly. "Not with fists or weapons, but with the truth and with the knowledge that what we have is worth defending. Fletcher may think he holds all the cards, but he doesn't understand the strength that comes from people who have found their place in the world." Outside, the wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of a hard winter ahead. But inside the cabin, three people who had found each other against all odds were preparing to fight for the right to remain together, whatever the cost might be. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Grey Wolf cabin. Helena was kneading bread dough when she heard a single horse approaching at a measured pace, very different from Fletcher's aggressive arrival the day before. Through the window, she could see an older man on a sturdy bay horse, wearing the kind of practical clothes that suggested someone comfortable with wilderness travel, but not necessarily looking for trouble. Marcus emerged from the workshop where he had been working since before dawn, apparently unable to sleep after the previous day's confrontation. His face was etched with worry and determination in equal measure, but he straightened when he saw their visitor dismounting near the cabin. "Morning, Marcus," the stranger called out, his voice carrying a tone of respectful familiarity. "Mind if I water my horse and have a word with you, Judge Morrison?" Marcus replied with obvious surprise. "Of course." "Sage, come take care of the judge's horse." Lena watched through the window as a distinguished man in his 60s approached the cabin with the measured gait of someone accustomed to being listened to. His silver hair was neatly trimmed despite the frontier setting, and his clothes, while practical, showed quality that spoke of means and position. This was clearly someone of importance in the wider community. "I rode out from Klamath Falls as soon as I heard about yesterday's trouble," Judge Morrison said without preamble. "Tom Fletcher paid me a visit last evening, demanding that I issue some kind of official order to support his claims against you and Miss Flynn." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And did you—" "I told him that legal matters require evidence, not just accusations based on prejudice and bad temper," the judge replied firmly. "But I thought you should know that he's not planning to let this matter rest. He's talking about bringing more men next time and making formal complaints to the territorial authorities." Lena stepped out of the cabin, wiping flour from her hands and trying to assess this new development. Judge Morrison studied her with keen grey eyes that seemed to take in everything about her appearance and demeanor in a single glance. "You must be Miss Flynn," he said courteously. "I understand you've taken responsibility for Fletcher's cattle losses, though I suspect there's more to that story than meets the eye." "I'm trying to prevent further conflict, Your Honor," Lena replied carefully. "Mr. Fletcher seemed determined to blame someone, and I thought it better that the blame fall on me rather than on Mr. Greywolf or his daughter." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "A noble sentiment, but possibly an unwise strategy. Fletcher is the kind of man who sees compromise as weakness and kindness as an invitation to push harder. By accepting blame for something you didn't do, you may have made the situation worse rather than better." "What do you suggest we do?" Marcus asked bluntly. The judge was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving from the well-maintained cabin to the productive garden, to the obvious signs of a family working together to create something good and lasting. "The truth is, Marcus, you're fighting more than just one man's greed. Fletcher represents an attitude that's unfortunately common in these territories, the belief that people like you don't belong, that mixed families threaten some imagined purity of frontier life. I know what I'm fighting," Marcus said quietly. "The question is whether the law will stand behind justice or prejudice. In my courtroom, the law stands behind evidence and truth," Judge Morrison replied firmly. "But Fletcher isn't planning to take this matter to court. He's planning to use intimidation and violence to get what he wants, and that puts you in a very dangerous position." Sage appeared around the corner of the cabin, having finished caring for the judge's horse. She listened to the adult conversation with the serious attention of a child who understood that important decisions were being made that would affect her future. "Judge Morrison," she said suddenly, "why do some people hate us for being who we are?" The question hung in the morning air like a challenge, simple in its phrasing but devastating in its implications. Judge Morrison looked at the little girl for a long moment before answering, "Because, young lady, some people are afraid of anything that's different from what they know. They think that if they can drive away the differences, they can make the world simpler and safer. But what they don't understand is that diversity makes communities stronger, not weaker." "Then why don't you stop them?" Sage asked with the direct logic of childhood. "Because the law can only act after crimes have been committed," the judge admitted. "And by then, it's often too late to prevent the damage." It was then that Lena made a decision that would change everything. She had been listening to the conversation while considering their impossible situation, and suddenly she saw a path forward that none of them had considered. "Judge Morrison," she said, stepping forward with new determination, "what if Fletcher's claims could be disproven publicly? What if we could demonstrate that his cattle deaths had nothing to do with Mr. Greywolf or his practices?" "That would certainly help," the judge replied, But how would you propose to do that? Fletcher's not likely to allow an independent investigation of his ranch. Lena looked at Marcus, then at Sage, seeing understanding begin to dawn in their faces. Because I know what's actually killing his cattle. I've seen the symptoms before and I know how to prove it. Over the next hour, Lena explained her theory to the judge and Marcus. During her weeks at the cabin, she had observed Fletcher's cattle during walks through the valley, noting signs of illness that had nothing to do with traditional medicine or plant poisoning. The animals showed classic symptoms of liver fluke infestation, a parasitic infection that resulted from poor pasture management and contaminated water sources. My father treated similar cases in California, she explained. The symptoms are distinctive: weight loss, weakness, and death in the most severely affected animals. But the key evidence would be found in post-mortem examination of the dead cattle. The liver damage from flukes leaves unmistakable signs, and you're willing to stake your reputation on this diagnosis? Judge Morrison asked. I'm willing to stake more than my reputation, Lena replied firmly. I'm willing to stake our future on it. Judge Morrison studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. I'll arrange for Dr. Harrison from Klamath Falls to conduct examinations of Fletcher's dead cattle. If your diagnosis is correct, it should clear Mr. Grey Wolf of any responsibility for the losses. But even as they made these plans, all three adults understood that they were fighting more than just false accusations about dead cattle. Fletcher's real goal was to drive Marcus and his mixed family away from the valley. And he would likely find other excuses, even if this one failed. There's something else we need to consider, Judge Morrison said quietly. Even if we can prove that Fletcher's accusations are groundless, that may not be enough to guarantee your safety. Men like Fletcher don't give up easily when they feel their authority has been challenged. It was Sage who provided the key insight that would ultimately save them all. Judge Morrison, she said thoughtfully, Fletcher keeps saying that people like us don't belong here. But what if we could show that we do belong? What if we could prove that we make the community stronger? What do you mean, sweetheart? Lena asked. Well, you saved my life twice with your medicine knowledge. And Papa helps people all the time. He's fixed wagons and furniture for half the families in the valley. And Mama used to help with births and healing before she died. We're not taking anything away from other people. We're adding things that make everyone's lives better. The simple wisdom of the child's observation struck all three adults simultaneously. They had been thinking defensively, trying to disprove Fletcher's accusations rather than demonstrating their positive value to the community. She's right, Marcus said slowly. We've been letting Fletcher define the terms of this conflict. Maybe it's time we reminded people of what we actually contribute. Over the next 3 days, they put together a strategy that was both bold and risky, while Judge Morrison arranged for the cattle examination that would clear them of Fletcher's specific charges. Marcus and Lena began reaching out to other families in the valley, people who had benefited from Marcus's craftsmanship, Lena's medical knowledge, or Sarah's healing skills in years past. The response was better than they had dared hope. The Kowalski family remembered when Marcus had repaired their wagon wheel in a snowstorm, probably saving their lives. The Hendersons recalled how Sarah had delivered their youngest child when the regular doctor couldn't make it through a spring flood. The Patterson family spoke gratefully of the furniture Marcus had crafted for their home, work that would last for generations. But it was Mrs. Chen, the wife of a Chinese merchant who had faced his own share of prejudice, who provided the most powerful testimony. When my husband was hurt in that mining accident, she told Lena, your Marcus rode 20 miles through a blizzard to bring Dr. Harrison to our house. He didn't ask for payment, didn't expect thanks, just did what needed doing because a neighbor was in trouble. As word spread through the community, something unexpected began to happen. People who had remained neutral in the conflict began to take sides, and many of them chose to support the Grey Wolf family. They organized quietly, planning a demonstration of community support that would counter Fletcher's intimidation tactics. The confrontation came sooner than expected. On the fourth day after Judge Morrison's visit, Fletcher returned with 8 men instead of 6, clearly intending to escalate the pressure on Marcus and his family. But this time, they found more than just 3 people waiting for them. As Fletcher's group crested the hill overlooking the Grey Wolf cabin, they encountered a sight that brought them up short. 23 members of the local community had gathered in the yard, representing families of various backgrounds and circumstances who had come to stand with their neighbors. Judge Morrison was there in an official capacity, along with Dr. Harrison, who had completed his examination of Fletcher's cattle. "What the hell is this?" Fletcher demanded, clearly taken aback by the size of the opposition he faced. "This is what a community looks like when it decides to protect its own," Judge Morrison replied calmly. "Dr. Harrison, would you please share your findings regarding Mr. Fletcher's cattle?" The doctor, a thin man with precise mannerisms, consulted his notes before speaking. "I examined the carcasses of 3 cattle from Mr. Fletcher's herd. All 3 died from advanced liver fluke infestation, a parasitic infection caused by grazing in poorly drained pastures with contaminated water sources. There is no evidence of poisoning, traditional medicine, or any other external cause of death." Fletcher's face turned an alarming shade of red. "That's impossible. Those animals were fine until Grey Wolf started messing with them. Mr. Fletcher," Dr. Harrison continued professionally, "liver flukes take months to cause fatal damage. These animals have been infected since spring, long before Miss Flynn arrived in the valley. The problem is endemic to your low-lying pastures and could be solved with proper drainage and pasture rotation." The medical evidence was devastating to Fletcher's case, but Lena could see in his eyes that he wasn't planning to accept defeat gracefully. Men like Fletcher didn't back down when confronted with facts that contradicted their prejudices. They doubled down on their aggression. "I don't care what some fancy doctor says," Fletcher snarled. "I know what I know, and I'm not backing down from protecting this valley from undesirable elements." It was then that Jim Patterson, the trading post owner, stepped forward from the group of community supporters. "Tom, you keep talking about undesirable elements, but you're looking at the wrong people. These folks," he gestured toward Marcus, Lena, and Sage, "have done nothing but contribute to this community. Meanwhile, you're the one bringing violence and threats to a peaceful valley." "That's right," added Mrs. Kowalski. "Sarah Grey Wolf delivered half the children in this county, and Marcus has helped more families than I can count. What have you done besides complain and cause trouble?" One by one, other community members began speaking up, sharing stories of kindness and assistance they had received from the Grey Wolf family. The testimonials painted a picture of people who had quietly become essential threads in the fabric of valley life. Fletcher looked around at the faces surrounding him, clearly realizing that he had miscalculated the level of support for his campaign. But instead of retreating, he made a decision that revealed the true ugliness of his character. "You're all fools if you think this is over," he shouted. "I don't care how many of you stand with them today. There are more of us than there are of you, and we have ways of dealing with people who don't know their place." The threat was unmistakable, and Judge Morrison stepped forward with the full authority of his office. "Mr. Fletcher, you are now making public threats of violence against law-abiding citizens. If you continue on this path, I will have no choice but to issue warrants for your arrest." But Fletcher was beyond reason now, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You can issue all the warrants you want, but they won't help these people when we come back. This valley will be cleansed of undesirable elements, one way or another." It was Sage who broke the tense silence that followed Fletcher's threat. The little girl stepped forward from her position beside Lena and Marcus, her toy bow held confidently in her hands. "Mr. Fletcher," she said in a clear, carrying voice, "my mama always told me that people who threaten others are really just scared inside. What are you so scared of?" The question, asked by a 7-year-old child, somehow carried more power than all the adult arguments that had preceded it. Fletcher stared at Sage as if he couldn't believe she had dared to challenge him. "I'm not scared of anything, especially not some half-breed brat. Then why are you trying so hard to make us go away?" Sage continued with devastating logic. "If we're not threatening to you, why do you care where we live or who we love?" The simple question exposed the fundamental weakness in Fletcher's position, and several of his own men began to look uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation had taken. Fighting adult men was one thing, but threatening a child was something else entirely. Judge Morrison seized the moment. "Mr. Fletcher, you have a choice to make. You can accept Dr. Harrison's findings, apologize for your false accusations, and return to managing your ranch properly. Or you can continue on this path and face the legal consequences of threatening violence against your neighbors." For a moment, it seemed as though Fletcher might choose the reasonable path. But then his gaze fell on Marcus and Lena standing together, their hands joined in a gesture of mutual support, and his face hardened with renewed hatred. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Not by a long shot." As Fletcher and his men rode away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and unresolved tension, the community supporters began to disperse. But before they left, many of them approached Marcus, Lena, and Sage with words of encouragement and promises of continued support. "You folks have shown more courage today than most people manage in a lifetime," Judge Morrison said as he prepared to depart. "But I want you to be careful. Fletcher's threats weren't idle, and men like him don't give up easily when they feel their authority has been challenged. What do you recommend?" Marcus asked. "Stay alert, stay together, and don't hesitate to send word if you need help," the judge replied. "This community has spoken today, and that means something. But it also means that the real test may be yet to come." As evening fell and the cabin returned to its usual quiet, the three members of the Grey Wolf family sat together by the fire, processing the day's events and contemplating an uncertain future. They had won a victory, but they all understood that it might be only the first battle in a longer war. "Are you sorry you stayed?" Marcus asked Lena quietly as Sage dozed against her shoulder. "Sorry?" Lena looked at him with surprise. "Marcus, today I watched an entire community stand up for what's right. I saw people who barely know me risk their own safety to defend our family. And I saw this brave little girl face down a grown man with nothing but truth and courage." She paused, looking around at the warm cabin that had become her home, at the man who had become her anchor, and at the child who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. "I've never been less sorry about anything in my entire life," she said firmly. "Fletcher can bring 100 men if he wants to. We belong here, all of us together, and no amount of prejudice or intimidation is going to change that." Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of winter's challenges ahead. But inside the cabin, three people who had found each other against all odds prepared to face whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that they were no longer alone in their fight for the right to love and belong. 6 months later, spring 1879, the morning sun painted the Cascade Mountains in shades of gold and rose, casting long shadows across the valley where wildflowers had begun to carpet the meadows in brilliant colors. Helena Grey Wolf stood at the kitchen window of the cabin, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly where new life grew, watching her husband and daughter work together in the expanded garden they had planted to feed their growing family. The winter had passed peacefully, with no further trouble from Fletcher and his supporters. Word had spread through the territory about the community's stand against intimidation, and gradually other families facing similar prejudice had reached out for support and guidance. The Grey Wolf cabin had become an unofficial sanctuary for those who needed refuge from hatred, and Helena had discovered a calling she never could have imagined during her desperate days in Timber Ridge. "Mama Helena," Sage called from the garden, using the name that had evolved naturally over the months. "Come see how big the medicine plants are getting." Helena smiled at the title that had become as precious to her as any legal document. She had never officially adopted Sage, but the bonds between them had grown stronger than blood, forged through shared challenges and quiet moments of love. At 8 years old, Sage was already showing remarkable skill as a healer. Combining traditional Modoc knowledge with the medical training Helena provided, Marcus looked up from where he was building a new trellis for climbing beans, his face lighting with the smile that never failed to make Helena's heart skip. They had married in a simple ceremony conducted by Judge Morrison the previous autumn, surrounded by the community members who had become their chosen family. The wedding had been modest but perfect, celebrating not just their love but their victory over those who would have torn them apart. "The baby's moving again," Helena said, placing Marcus's hand on her belly where their child was practicing somersaults. "I think we're going to have a very active little one, like someone else I know," Marcus replied, glancing meaningfully at Sage, who was currently attempting to train one of the barn cats to fetch like a dog. "Papa, Mama, Helena," Sage announced, abandoning her cat training project. "Mrs. Patterson sent word that the new family arrived in town yesterday. The ones fleeing from those troubles in Colorado. Should we invite them for Sunday dinner?" Helena and Marcus exchanged a look of understanding. Their home had become known as a place where mixed families and others facing prejudice could find acceptance and support. It was a role they had grown into naturally, their own experience with persecution making them uniquely qualified to help others facing similar challenges. "Of course," Helena replied. "And we should ask Dr. Harrison to join us as well. He mentioned wanting to discuss establishing a proper medical clinic in the valley." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor in the form of Tom Fletcher, but this time he came alone and on foot, his hat in his hands and his expression humble in a way that none of them had ever seen before. Helena felt Marcus tense beside her as they watched Fletcher approach, but something in the man's posture suggested this was not a hostile visit. "Mr. Greywolf, Mrs. Greywolf," Fletcher said formally, "I was wondering if I might have a word with you." "What do you want, Fletcher?" Marcus asked warily, his hand moving protectively to Helena's shoulder. Fletcher took a deep breath, clearly struggling with words he had never expected to say. "I want to apologize for everything. The accusations, the threats, the trouble I caused your family." Helena studied Fletcher's face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only genuine remorse and something that looked like defeat. "What's changed, Mr. Fletcher?" "My grandson," Fletcher said simply. "My daughter married a Mexican fellow down in California, and they just had a baby. Beautiful little boy, but he's got his father's coloring, and my daughter's been getting some of the same treatment I gave you folks." The confession hung in the air like a revelation. Fletcher continued, his voice rough with emotion. "She wrote me a letter, told me about the names people call her son, the way they look at her family, like they don't belong. And I realized that I was no better than the worst of them." Sage stepped forward from where she had been listening behind Helena. "Mr. Fletcher," she said seriously, "does your grandson like to play?" The unexpected question from the child seemed to catch Fletcher off guard. Yes, I suppose he does. Old babies like to play, then maybe someday he can come visit us," Sage continued, with the generous spirit that never ceased to amaze the adults around her. "I could teach him about the mountains, and Mama Helena could show him the medicine plants. It doesn't matter what color he is. What matters is whether he's kind." Fletcher looked at the little girl who had once faced down his threats with nothing but courage, and Helena saw tears gather in his eyes. "You'd welcome my grandson here? After everything I put you through, Mr. Fletcher," Helena said gently, "we've learned that families come in all different forms. What makes them strong isn't how they look, but how much they love each other." The transformation in Fletcher over the following months was remarkable. He became one of their strongest advocates in the community, using his influence to support other mixed families and speaking out against the kind of prejudice he had once embodied. His daughter and grandson did eventually visit, and Sage appointed herself as the baby's honorary big sister, teaching him Modoc lullabies and showing him the wonders of mountain life. As Helena's pregnancy progressed, The excitement in their household grew to almost tangible levels. Sage had appointed herself as chief assistant to both parents, reading every book about babies she could find and practicing her midwifery skills under Helena's careful guidance. Marcus built a beautiful cradle from mountain maple, carving protective symbols into the wood, according to traditional Modoc custom, while incorporating design elements that reflected Helena's Irish heritage. "I think the baby's going to be a girl," Sage announced one evening as they sat by the fire. "I had a dream about her, and she looked just like Mama Helena, but with Papa's eyes. And what if the baby is a boy?" Marcus asked, smiling at his daughter's confidence. "Then I'll teach him to use a bow like mine," Sage replied practically. "And he can help me gather medicine plants when he gets big enough. Either way, he's going to be the luckiest baby in the whole territory because he'll have the best family." The baby arrived on a warm spring morning, just as the apple trees were beginning to bloom. Helena's labor was attended by Dr. Harrison and 2 experienced midwives from town. But it was Sage who provided the most comfort, holding her stepmother's hand and singing softly in both English and Modoc throughout the long hours. When their son finally made his appearance, he was perfect in every way, healthy, strong, and possessed of powerful lungs that announced his arrival to the entire valley. Marcus held his new child, with tears streaming down his face, while Sage danced around the room, proclaiming herself the best big sister in the world. "What should we name him?" Helena asked as she cradled their son against her chest. "Hope," said Sage immediately, "because that's what he represents. Hope that love is stronger than hate, and that families like ours can thrive anywhere." "Hope isn't usually a boy's name," Marcus pointed out gently. "Then we'll call him Hopi," Sage declared, using the Modoc word that carried similar meaning. "Hopi Greywolf. It's perfect," and somehow it was perfect. As Helena looked around at her husband, her daughter, and her newborn son, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Oregon chasing the promise of a fictional man and a life that never existed. Instead, she had found something infinitely more valuable, a love that was real, a family that chose each other every day, and a community that had learned to value differences rather than fear them. "Do you ever think about that letter?" Marcus asked one evening as they watched their children play in the garden. Sage was teaching 2-year-old Hopi to identify edible plants, while the latest additions to their extended family, 3 children whose parents had died in a mining accident, chased fireflies through the twilight. "Which letter?" Helena replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. "The one from William Ashford that brought you to Timber Ridge in the first place." Helena considered the question seriously. "I think about how angry I was when I realized it was all lies. But now I wonder if maybe it wasn't a lie so much as a misdirection. Maybe I was meant to come to Oregon, just not for the reasons I thought." "You think fate had a hand in bringing us together?" Marcus asked. "I think," Helena said, watching Sage lift Hopi high enough to catch a low-hanging firefly, "that sometimes the best destinations are the ones we never thought to look for. I came here looking for one kind of family and found something infinitely better." She leaned against Marcus's shoulder, feeling the contentment that came from knowing exactly where she belonged. The little Modoc girl with the toy bow had asked if she would marry her papa, and in saying yes, Helena had found not just a husband and daughter, but a purpose and a place in the world that fit her perfectly. The sun set behind the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, while in the valley below, the Grey Wolf family gathered their children and prepared for another peaceful evening in the home they had built together through love, courage, and the unshakable belief that all families, regardless of their composition, deserved a place to belong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.